All right, this is the growth of nationalism. I'm going to take you through the important parts of Chapter 10 that are going to be on the midterm. We're a little bit behind because of the hurricane, so I'm kind of shortening, condensing this down for you. But basically, the most important thing I want you guys to understand is how do we see trouble here in Europe, especially during these years. The significance of 1914 is that is the year World War I begins. So yes, we are getting close to our world wars. I know you thought it would never happen. But I want you guys to be on the lookout as we go through these 4 regions in Europe. How do we see instability growing, and how is that related to nationalism? Nationalism is pride in your country. So think about that while I go through this. Okay, so we're going to start off in Germany. Germany, as you might remember, was not really one country yet. We've been talking a lot about Austria, we've been talking a lot about Prussia. That's going to change in 1870, and we're going to see that Otto von Bismarck is going to be the guy who gets the credit for really changing that. Otto von Bismarck will be the one who gets the credit for really unifying Germany, all the different Germanic states that were drawn up after the Congress of Vienna, and bringing them kind of under one umbrella. So he does that using several different methods. One of the ones that's really credited to him is the idea of realpolitik. So realpolitik, in your book, it describes it as the right of a nation-state to pursue its own advantage by any means necessary, including war and breaking treaties. So kind of a Machiavellian idea there that he's going to do whatever it takes to get to the top. And whatever's best for his country, that's all he cares about. He doesn't care about his friendships. He doesn't care about previous alliances. So he is going to kind of be somewhat aggressive in his goal of uniting the Germanic city-states. And if anybody stood in his way, including other Germanic speakers, he didn't care. He would take them down. So he's kind of known as being a fierce leader there. The other thing he's going to do is focus on what he called blood and iron. And what that means is just he really wanted to build up 2 things. Number 1, Germany's industry, and number 2, Germany's military. I think he saw what industry had done for Great Britain, and he was really hoping to bring that to his country and the wealth and the power that came along with that. And also build up his military so he'd be able to really back up his goals. So under his rule, cities really grew very quickly, and Germany did become very industrial. And by the turn of the last century, they were one of the top industrial producers, lots of miles of railroad track, lots of factories. The middle class definitely grew, but so did the gap between the rich and the poor. I think you're definitely going to see that they go through those struggles just like England did, just like the United States did, that with industry comes some problems too. And as the workers tried to kind of push for more reforms, he didn't want to hear that. He definitely put his foot down on that, and anytime any socialist movements or workers' unions would make demands, he would pretty violently and sometimes crush those. So you didn't really want to mess with this guy. He was pretty tough. But you know what he does? He does unify Germany. So you can see kind of how he brings either through the blood or the iron and through warfare, he will unify a lot of these Germanic city-states. So as we approach 1914, you're going to see Germany being really powerful. You're going to see them being very industrial. And also, to some extent, they have a little bit of a target on their back because they've made some enemies here through these wars, through the Franco-Prussian War. There's no love between the French and the Germans because of that. So you're definitely seeing a little bit of some rivalries nearby. Neighbors are not really going to be fans of Germany. Shifting gears to Italy. So we've got, same thing, Italy was, historically, it's not very unified, mostly because of their geography. They're very rocky, being a peninsula, in this time it's hard to get from one end to the other. It takes you a while. So it was more kind of localized city-states. And these 2 guys first kind of are competing for power. We've got Count Cavour and Giuseppe Garibaldi. And eventually they decide to team up and kind of form a united Italy under the King Victor Emmanuel II. So we get a unified Italy here in the 1870s as well. But just like we saw in Germany, not everything's going to be all sunshine for everyone. Some people definitely weren't a fan of this. And there are regional divisions. In the north, you see more urban centers and definitely more people that are wealthier kind of located in the north, and the south was being looked at as being more rural, more kind of backward, and with more poor people as well. And so there were definitely some rivalries even within Italy. The other thing is that the Catholic Church did not approve of unification. They felt like this was putting Italy above the church, and so they were kind of standing in the way. And then, of course, you've got anarchists or even socialist workers putting some pressure on the government, demanding more rights. The difference we're going to see, the main difference between Italy and Germany, because they both really unified almost the same time. But Italy really lacked industry, where Germany really, Bismarck really did that pretty well. Italy did not have the industrial might at all. And that's going to be something that's going to hurt them for quite a while. So because of that, they're not going to have a lot of economic opportunities. And so a lot of people started leaving Italy, emigrated. That means leaving the country. And many of them came to the United States. So you definitely see Italy as weaker than Germany for sure, not only industrially but economically, and that's going to hurt them a bit. The other country we're going to look at here is in Russia. There's a lot going on in Russia, and we know, hopefully you guys remember, Russia is no stranger to mistreating their people. That's been kind of a common theme we've seen, that even under Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, they have a long history here of their serfs being mistreated. And remember, it's still a feudal society here in Russia, so you're talking 97% of the population are serfs. And they're under an autocracy. Autocracy is a government where one person has all the power. And that's pretty much how it's been in Russia from roughly the 1600s until now. We're approaching the 1900s. We're going to take you through a couple of key leaders here. And I wish I could tell you that they had different names, but they weren't very creative with their names back then. So it's a lot of Alexanders and a lot of Nicholases. So hang with me here. So Alexander II, he's going to be the guy we're going to start looking at. And he'll be the one that gets the credit for emancipating all the serfs. That means freeing. So he frees all the serfs and gives them freedom, grants them freedom. Now you would think that the serfs, the former serfs, would be happy, right? Actually, not so much. The peasants were still upset. They got the worst land. They were still heavily taxed, like what we kind of saw in France prior to the French Revolution. So a lot of them felt like they had no choice, but they had to move to cities. So they did. And Russia tried to industrialize, but they just weren't able to really put it together, like Germany did. So they're attempting to industrialize, but people are moving to the cities so quickly, they just can't keep up. So even though he freed the serfs, people are still upset at him. And the other thing they're upset about is the noblemen and the rich men still dominated the government because their votes counted more in the Russian Duma, and the Duma is essentially what we call the Congress. He also eased restrictions on the press. He modernized their judicial system. He expands their educational system, reorganizes his army. So he does do some really good things here. Frees the serfs, does all this, but still people wanted more. And I think this guy just kind of couldn't win. People were still so angry. And because of that, he actually was assassinated. So that made his son really upset, because his son's like, really? My dad does all this good stuff for you, frees you, and you kill him? Okay, it's on. So his son goes completely the opposite direction. Alexander III is fed up with the revolutionaries. He doesn't want to hear these peasants whining, and he is going to put the foot down. Takes away all the freedoms his father gave, and starts this program called Russification. So Russification basically targeted anybody that he thought wasn't, quote, Russian enough. That would mean anybody who didn't practice the Russian Orthodox religion, anybody who didn't speak the right dialect of Russian. So if you maybe lived in what's now Ukraine or Belarus and you had a different dialect, you were targeted. If you were a Russian Jew, which there were quite a few Russian Jews, you were targeted. And that's what these pogroms were all about. That's not a typo, it's not program, it's actually pogrom. And a pogrom means an organized massacre of a minority group. And under the pogroms under Alexander, the Russian Jews were targeted, arrested, and killed. Many of them were forced to leave and emigrate. And you might say, wait a second, that sounds kind of like the Holocaust. Yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? I want you guys to recognize that Jews had been targeted for quite some time, and not just in Germany and not just by Hitler. This was something that unfortunately wasn't new in 1933. There had been a history of this, and there had been a pattern, and world leaders, really, on all sense, knew that this was going on, and had chances to stop it years prior, really. So it's not like it came out of nowhere, and so I just want you guys to recognize that. That's an important thing to recognize. We do see the workers rise up and try to revolt here in 1905. The last Tsar we'll look at, actually the last Tsar period in Russia, will be Nicholas II and his wife Alexandra. And they take over in 1894, and this is when the workers are fed up. They've had it. So these revolutionary feelings are sweeping over Russia by now. And the working class is pretty big, and they're pretty angry. They're upset about the living and working conditions in these factories and in these cities, just like we've seen in other countries, including England, including the United States. We're going to see workers starting starting to kind of get vocal about that and wanting some change. The difference here is we're going to see that the Tsar is going to violently put that down, and that's what Bloody Sunday is all about. January 22nd, 1905, 200,000 workers are peacefully assembled in St. Petersburg to try to get reform, and that's the picture you're seeing right here. So Tsar Nicholas II, instead of listening to the workers, hearing them out, he was a little nervous about that. I mean, I probably would be too, right? 200,000 people is somewhat against you. So he goes the opposite direction, and he does order the guards to open fire. And these are actual pictures you can see. Look at the people running, running away. It's just kind of chaotic, and hundreds of people were killed here. So the Tsar keeps his power for now, but he is forced to make some changes. The Soviets, which means workers' councils, are formed. They're almost like unions, what we would call unions in England or the United States. The Duma, the legislature, is going to be formed almost, like I said, like a Congress here in Russia. And he's going to at least pretend that he wants to listen to them. But the thing is he doesn't. And remember, we saw that in the English Civil War. Remember way back we talked about Charles II. He signs that Petition of Right. He pretends he's listening, but he's not. He doesn't care, And so things are going to be still pretty tense in Russia here. The other thing the Russians are upset about, kind of embarrassed about, is they got absolutely embarrassed in the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. Japan put a whooping down on Russia. And what we're going to see is Russia may have a lot of people. They may have a lot of land. But the fact that they don't have much industry and they don't have really a well-organized military that is armed for everyone, is going to be a big problem. It's going to hurt them in World War I, and it's going to be something that will lead them to eventually say, that's enough. We're having enough of these czars. We need to get them out of here. So Nicholas II, he wins now, but 12 years later, this is going to happen again. He's not going to win. I'll tell you that. Okay, the last place we want to look at is Austria-Hungary. And this is the region that we're going to see World War I will really start in. That's why they're nicknamed the powder keg. I always tell people, when you think of a powder keg, think about like old, maybe Bugs Bunny cartoons you watched where there was like a gunpowder barrel, and there'd be a hole in it, and maybe it was Wile E. Coyote, I can't remember, but the coyote would like drag, and there'd be a line of powder, and all the Roadrunner would need to do is light the spark, and then goes up in the face of the coyote. So that's what we're dealing with here. This area is ready to explode. The revolutions here had failed. We've got an emperor who's really strong, and he is determined to keep power. So he's crushing the revolutionaries. He's really trying to hold together this large and very diverse empire. How diverse? Well, I'll get to that. But basically, we've got a dual monarchy, and a dual monarchy is where you have two countries ruling together as one. So one king for two countries. Austria-Hungary, I'm sorry, Austria, let's try this again, and Hungary. So they're together. They're independent politically, but they're really dependent on each other for economics and jobs and things like that. Now here's the problem. 3/5 of the people living in Austria-Hungary are not Austrian or Hungarian. They're something else. See all the countries kind of hiding here? We've got Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia, Herzegovina. We've got Bohemia, which is today called the Czech Republic, Moravia. I mean, there are all different people living in here that want to be their own country. They don't want to be Austrian or Hungarian. So they're really resentful towards their leader, and they're really upset. And I mean, look at that. Look at all the different groups of people living here in Austria-Hungary. Okay, in Austria-Hungary, and the one leader in charge of them is trying to hold together the whole thing. So it's really just a recipe for disaster. This is where we're going to see World War I start. And this is 1910. World War I will start in 1914. So we're very close. So what do you need to understand? And let's tie it all together. By 1914, by the time World War I starts, we have rivalries growing. We have nationalism, a lot of pride in the country from people who are upset. They're angry that they've been taken over or mistreated. They're going to be angry with their leaders. We see that in Russia specifically. And it's just ready to explode. So that takes us really all the way here through Chapter 10, what you really need to know. Hopefully this helped you out, and make sure you go over that midterm study guide and just kind of understand what it says on the midterm study guide. I'm really trying to shorten down Chapter 10 for you. And if you need help, see me.